Hello, I'm Ami Aldasuki. I'm the editor of the HR Observer, and today I have a brilliant guest, the world acclaimed #1 New York Times best-selling author, Daniel Pink. His books, The Power of Regret, When, To Sell is Human, Drive, and A Whole New Mind have changed lives. Welcome, Daniel. I'm super excited, as you can see, to speak with you today, and we do have a few things to talk about.
I'm glad to be here with you from my pretend room that has a piano in it.
Great. Um, so you have extensively researched motivation, particularly in your book Drive. So in today's world of, evolving work, especially post-pandemic, how has your understanding of motivation shifted?
I'm not sure my understanding of motivation itself has shifted all that much. I mean, I think what we know from 50, 60 years of research, along with our own lived experience, is that the most powerful motivator for people over the long term is doing things because you want to do them, doing things because you're getting better at it, doing things because they have a purpose, doing things, especially doing things autonomously. And so I don't think that the human nature has changed at all post pandemic. What I think has changed is that the elements of intrinsic motivation, particularly what I like to call autonomy, mastery, and purpose, I think they become more important than they were pre-pandemic. So, for instance, if you look at the move toward remote work, I've been writing about remote work for over 20 years, and in the early days, people said, "Oh no, it'll never happen. You can't do it. It's not. We don't have the technology. You can't trust people to do it." And then, in the space of a few months, in a few weeks, literally in March of 2020, hundreds of millions of people around the world did it and it worked fine. And they did it for a year and a half or 2 years. All right. So I think that's a pretty good proof of concept. So I think that autonomy has become more important in a world of AI. People need to master skills that can't be done by machine intelligence. And when you have an existential threat like the pandemic, people are more concerned about purpose.
Right. And it's really interesting that you brought in the idea of AI. So here's a question. So how can professionals, or let's say HR professionals, bring in the concept of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, but at the same time, hey, we have AI and automation, and we
Yeah.
need to make sure people are doing the work creatively, but at the same time, we don't know if they're doing it, and at the same time, we need to empower. It's a whole lot of things. So how do you see the role of human creativity evolving in the workplace as we have AI and automation and
I
so
mean, I
forth?
think that I think that's like the central question that people all over the world are asking themselves right now, and I don't have a simple answer to that. I mean, I do have a simple answer to that. It's a conceptual answer. It's not an answer that gives much direction in what to do, which is that I really don't believe that the history of technology, based on the history of technology over time, that um, that one needs to be incredibly worried about AI obliterating lots of jobs. I think what you have to worry as an individual level, be concerned about if you're an individual. I'm not sure that AI is coming for your job. I do think that another person using AI could be coming for your job. That is,
Right.
it's really the combination of human intelligence and machine intelligence. And so the challenge for organizations is to deploy this very powerful technology in a way that gets things done for the organization. But the challenge for individuals is what I'm actually more concerned about is that how do you learn to do things that can't be done by machine intelligence? How do you use this incredible tool to augment what you're doing? It's the same thing. It reminds me a little bit of search engines. You know, when search engines came out, people said, "Oh, we're not going to need researchers anymore," but we do. It's just that they're doing different kinds of research, right? We got a lot more people doing research. You're not going to the library and opening up an almanac, a print almanac, but search engines enabled people to do things that they couldn't imagine they were able to do. And so I think that's what it is with AI. But it's a big question mark right now. It's a
Right.
big question mark right now. I think one of the things that I think AI can be incredibly creativity enhancing. I'm using it to try to enhance my own creativity. AI right now, as a writer, what I'm using AI for is what I used to do 100 years ago. I worked as a speech writer, and I worked in an office with two other writers. And invariably, what we would do is we would be working on something and we'd say, "Hey, what's another way to say bobbity bobbity?" And so we just sort of talk and yell at each other. And AI does that for you. I can say to AI, I just wrote this sentence. It's really, really bad. I'm using this terrible cliche. What are 10 alternatives to this cliche? It'll give me 10 alternatives. 8 of them are going to be terrible. One is going to be so-so, and then one is going to trigger a better idea.
Right. What about purpose-driven work? How can people be still be driven by absurd purpose when they can see that, oh wait, I'm competing against a machine now?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is don't think that you're competing against a machine. You're actually using, in the same way you're not competing against email. You're not competing against search engines. You're not competing against um, uh, design programs. You're actually, these are tools, and so use the tool to enhance your purpose. I think that what's important when it comes to purpose is that you need to know why you're doing something. And this is where organizations come in. Organizations often don't give people a clear why for why they for their work. So you have to ask yourself, how is this making a difference, and how is what I'm doing making a contribution? And when you ask that, you can enlist AI as a tool to get you there.
Right. I'm going to shift a little bit from that subject and talk a little bit about your book, The Power of Regret. Um, you discuss the value of reflecting on mistakes. How do you think leaders and um, CEOs, etc., could cultivate a culture where failure is seen as an opportunity for growth rather than something to be feared?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I think one of the things that you see around the world, not only in the U.S. but around the world, is lip service to that idea. Failure is tolerant. Failure is an option. Failure is fine. And then when someone fails, they get clobbered. So, so I think that there are ways to do that. Number one would be to establish a sense of psychological safety, so that people feel free to speak up. People are encouraged to speak up. People are celebrated for speaking up.
Mhm.
Um, I think that's really essential. The other thing is to celebrate attempts more than outcomes. So let's say that you on the try something. You try something smart, interesting, seems like a good idea, but it doesn't work. What
Mm.
we should do is we should celebrate the try. We should say, way to go. That was so fantastic that you tried that, and celebrate that. Not only the things that actually work. The other thing is that leaders themselves can discuss more of their own failures and their own regrets, not in a self-flagellating way, but go to their team and say, here's a mistake that I made. Here's what I learned from it. Here's what I'm going to do going forward. Here's a regret that I have. Here's the lesson that I extract from it. Here's how it's going to guide me in the future. And so all those things together can create a condition in which people are trying more things. Inevitably, they're going to fail on some things, but they're going to score big on a few things.
Right. We're talking about people and not leadership, but is there what about leaders? Do they also have the safe space where they can actually make mistakes, or are there
Well,
chances? Yeah.
I mean, it's a really great question, and the answer is it depends, because even the so-called leaders often have somebody that they have to answer to. So they might have to answer to the CEO. If they're the CEO, they might have to answer to the board. If they are a founder, they might have to answer to investors. So ultimately, we all have, and ultimately, everybody is answering to customers. I think that the key and the key here is to try small experiments, small low stakes experiments, iterate them quickly, and shut down the ones that don't work and scale the ones that do work. I mean, that's so easy for me to say, but I think that's the way that things work. I'm convinced more and more that a lot of innovation is simply trying lots of things in low stakes ways, and seeing what works. And our ability to forecast what is going to work well and what is not going to work well is not very good. So you just have to try a bunch of different things. And if you go in with that ethic, that each try is valuable in its own, then you don't um, stigmatize failure in the same way.
Is it really the leadership's role to actually take care of the employee's well-being, or is it an individual's? It's my responsibility as an individual to actually take care of my own well-being and bring that into my work.
It's both. I think I think that's a really important question. I actually, again, this is in some ways a philosophical question on the
Right.
about what are the moral obligations of each party in this enterprise. My own view is that leaders are not responsible for the well-being of their employees, but they are responsible for creating the conditions in which the employees can be their best selves and do their best work. So so it's not quite I'm not sure this is the best analogy, but it's not quite parental. It's like, taking care of a 3-year-old, because if you're a parent taking care of a 3-year-old, you are responsible for their well-being. But
Right.
it is in some level, it's more like hospitality, where you are creating the conditions in which people can do great things. But that's an incredibly important question right now, is what are the mutual obligations from individuals to organizations and organizations to individuals? I locate myself somewhere in the middle. Not that, hey, employees are in charge of their own well-being, forget about anything else, or that leaders and organizations have to be incredibly paternalistic and take care of everybody. I'm somewhere in the middle.
What about, I mean, you have written a lot about remote work, etc. Now it's even more complicated than before. We have people who actually are not even within the organization's premises.
Yeah.
What does anything change here? Do we have a different kind of relationship that organizations need to bring into the table when it comes to taking care of their people?
I think we're figuring that out right now. I mean, again, it's one of those things where, I can jabber and forecast about what's going to happen, but in fact, people are going to actually do stuff and invent that. My own forecast for whatever it is, not only a forecast, it's more of an observation, is that especially in North America, we are entering a world. I think we're already there in many ways for certain kinds of white collar work, of essentially permanent hybrid. Um, and I don't think that we will. You opened by talking about how motivation has changed post pandemic. I I think that one of the ways we're not going to go back. I don't think, especially in North America, perhaps other places in the world, we are not going to go back to a world where an office was a place where a bunch of people sat in rows wearing headphones, staring into the computers, doing heads down work, and commuting however long in order to get there. I think that's going to be archaic. I think it is archaic. That said, I also don't think that most organizations are going to be fully remote, because there is some emerging evidence now that remote work is quite good for productivity. That people get a lot of stuff done when they have an option when they have some remote work. But the remote work, the Zooms, the Microsoft Teams, and whatnot, are actually less effective for innovation and crafting new ideas. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to see that work is going to become we're not it's going to become so hybrid, we're not going to call it hybrid anymore. We're just going to call it work, and we're going to have to figure out what should be done asynchronously, what should be done synchronously, what should be done together, what should be done separately, what should be done in person, what should be done remotely. And it's a great sorting that we're going to have to try to figure out. But I actually am I'm pretty optimistic that we're going to do that, because it's happening right now in our midst, in the same way that when let's go back into ancient times when email first came into organizations. There is like we didn't know exactly how email was going to be used in organizations, but we said, oh, people are going to use this. And then and then they tried it and used stuff, and then we said, "Oh, okay, this is how you use email." So I think it's somewhat similar to that.
I think so too. People always say, "Oh, are you going to do this?" Or whenever there is a change, really, this is going to work? Oh no, it's not going to work, and then it works. And I'm like, oh, it worked.
I'm telling you that. That's the insight here. Is that I think it's also really important, in just in terms of how we look at the world. That is what we often want is this kind of deep certainty, especially
Right.
people at the top. They want certainty. They want to have a plan. They want to have a strategy. And I understand those impulses, and I'm not against planning or strategy. That said, um, a lot of those are premised on the idea that you can figure out what's going to happen, and then based on figuring out what's going to happen, you can fashion a strategy. And I don't think right now we know what's going to happen. And I think that in some ways, the way to figure out what's going to happen is to act. That instead of sort of figuring out as the prelude to taking action, I think action is the form of figuring out.
Right. I'm tempted to ask you so many questions, but I can't not ask this question, which is, do strategies always work? Because I don't know, they don't
No,
work.
no, they don't always work. I mean, no, I mean, no, I mean, again, I'm not against strategy, but I've been through myself on boards, only for nonprofits, not for for-profit company, all manner of strategic planning processes. And strategic planning is great for the strategic planning industry. It's a good source of jobs and income. Beyond that, I've just seen so many strategic plans that essentially take, a year, sometimes even longer, to be fashioned, to be written about, to be litigated over, and then beep, they sit on a shelf or on a hard drive somewhere. And so, I think that especially right now, I think there's a different kind of metabolism. I feel the same way with, at some level, and forgive me for ranting on this too, is on like mission, vision, and values. The incredible amount of time and effort spent on fashioning mission, vision, and values. What I think is that in some ways you have to try stuff to discover your strategy, and you have to do things and talk about your mission, and your mission will emerge. I'm convinced that if you and I, this is a fun experiment for us, if you and I were to pick, any company in North America or Europe or in MENA, and walk down the hallway and say, tell me your company's mission, vision, and values, that most people would have no idea, including people in the C-suite.
Those who put the mission, vision, and values.
Yeah.
I do have a final question for you. And with your insights on the psychology of work, what innovative approaches do you think HR need to take to make sure that they're actually empowering their employees to remain motivated and relevant in the current era where things are just changing very quickly?
Yeah. So that's another great question. I think that part of it is a way to think about it, and part of it's not something to do. I think the way to think about it in HR and elsewhere is that today, this is a big change. Talented people need organizations much less than organizations need talented people. That people who have a lot of talent have enormous power in the labor market, more power than in some ways the organizations themselves. So that and so understanding that it isn't a world where the organizations hold all of the cards, that the very talented people in there have a lot of say. And so you want to treat people like that exceptionally well. You want to offer a sense of autonomy. You want to have I'm convinced that the most talented people not only want to work for a great company, but they want to work for a good company. They want to work for a company that's doing something worthwhile, that is treating their employees well, that is treating the environment well. And you want to have you want people to be able to learn and grow in that environment. So I think that's the way to think about it. That again, talented people need organizations less than organizations need talented people. In terms of the approach, I think at a simple level, it's hire great people. Hire great people. We have this mythology that we can hire, that we don't have to worry so much about who we hire because we can plug them into systems that will inevitably work, and that's not true. Hire great people, offer them a sense of purpose, offer them a sense of autonomy, hold them accountable because talented people like to be held accountable, and be from the leadership perspective. From the HR perspective, encourage everybody else to be a macro manager rather than a micromanager.
When you're talking about being held accountable, I was reflecting, and I do actually like being told, you've done this wrong, check yourself or something. I prefer it over like, oh yeah, you're the perfect person, you're
exactly.
Great.
But that's
no, thank you.
Come on, man. Come on, this is it. What this one we already know. We know this we know this from like 50 years about research on feedback. When the kind of feedback people want is very novices like positive feedback, But once you've been in the workplace a year or two, the kind of feedback that people want, that it doesn't matter so much whether it's positive or negative, but whether it's actionable. Is it
Mhm.
timely? Is it individualized? And is it actionable? That's what people want. So like you don't want to be told in response to a project that you do, it's like, you know, you're a moron. You don't know what you're doing. You want to say, you know what, I'm there. This part wasn't good enough, but here are 3 ways to make it better next time. That's
Yeah,
useful. That's what people. That's the kind of feedback that people want.
right, right. Daniel Pink, it was my great pleasure to speak to you, and I look forward to meeting you in HRSE.
In the not too distant future.